Gran Turismo 7 Spec 2 has just released, and with it come 50 new license challenges. If you remember from the original license challenges, you get a new car every time you can get all gold in any of the licenses. I hear this can be pretty difficult for some people, so I've decided to make a guide for every single one of the licenses. We're going to get you guys those cars. So let's get into it. The very first one is a classic Gran Turismo license test. I believe it's always been the very first one. It's just a simple start and stop, but it's wet this time. There's one mistake you can very easily make, so I'm going to show you right here. If you don't shift in time and it hits the rev limiter, you're going to go very slow, as you can see from the ghost pulling ahead. So of course I had to restart that one. I'm going to jump ahead to the one that I completed so we can just break down how to quickly get through it. The car we're given is all-wheel drive, so you really don't have to worry about traction. Just floor it from the start and no traction control is necessary. You can shift well before the red line and not worry about losing speed, so just floor it, shift early, and what we're going to do is look for the 100-meter board to hit the brakes. You're going to see that I actually hit the brakes and then lifted off of them because I noticed I was slowing down a little bit too much, but it's pretty simple. You just have to brake at the 100. For more complicated tests, we're going to go ahead and break it down a lot more than that, but this one's pretty simple. I don't think you're going to be able to get this one wrong. The next test is the exact same test, but this time we have a lot of horsepower and actually things start to get really tricky. I'm going to show you what happens if you just try to floor it and then slam on the brakes like we did in the last test. Right off the bat, you can see even with traction control, things get pretty sketchy. Second gear is pretty bad, but third gear is where it gets really bad because the difference in speed between how fast the tires are moving and the car is moving is really, really big. So for this test, even if you're using traction control, you're still going to have to learn to modulate the throttle. There are two main things you can focus on to help you finish this challenge with gold. Firstly, I'm in second gear. Starting in a higher gear in a powerful car can help give you a lot more traction. Secondly, I want you to consider traction control as reactive. That means something already has to be going wrong for it to kick in. So if you know you're going to start sliding the tires a lot in the middle of second gear, you can go ahead and modulate the throttle as you can see here before that happens, and you can be better than the traction control. There are a lot of driving purists who actually don't like traction control. It's a source of pride for a lot of people, and to be honest, I'm one of those people, so I'm going to show you a run without traction control. As you can see, I'm starting in second gear just to give us that extra traction, and I'm also just around 50% throttle. As the car starts moving, we can add a little bit more throttle as it bogs initially, but then we have to be very careful listening to what the tires are doing and feeling what the car is doing to know that we have to modulate the throttle as we go. At no point can I go full throttle with this challenge if we're not using traction control, and even when you do use traction control, it's not a great idea. But as you can see, it's still possible to do it if you don't want to use traction control. For a final note on traction control and learning how to wean yourself off traction control if you're trying to get off of it, I want you to look at this right here. What you're seeing flashing in red is the discrepancy between my actual throttle position and what the traction control is allowing to happen. You can see I'm around 90% throttle right here, but traction control is only giving it about 60% throttle. Studying how traction control changes your inputs could be a really good way to start finally getting off of traction control. In real life, a lot of these cars use traction control and are faster, but in Gran Turismo, traction control is usually slower. The next test is actually probably the easiest test in all of the licenses. It's a very small, very slow car going full throttle through a single corner. I don't really believe anyone actually struggles with this one. If you are not able to do this one and get gold, you're probably lifting off the throttle or touching the brakes. You don't have to do either of those things. If you still find yourself unable to do this, I want you to just pay attention to where I'm turning in and how slowly or how quickly I'm turning the wheel. Now, as I'm saying that, we can clearly see that I had to restart. That's because for no reason I was trying to maximize the speed of the car and just shift it when it gets to the red line. You really don't need to maximize the speed like that. We're going to turn in right about the 50-meter board. You'll see I'm gradually adding steering throughout the entire corner and then unwinding the steering after we get past the apex. Be careful not to go off track or touch the wall. Stay on the throttle and you'll be totally fine. I genuinely don't think anyone's going to have issues with that, but let me know if you do. As is the pattern, the next one is the exact same test, but with a faster car. We're going to give this one a proper breakdown. The game does a pretty good job of aiming you exactly where you want to be, but just make sure you align yourself up with the left side of the track early on so you're not turning while you're supposed to be braking. We're going to look for the 100-meter board, and right when we get directly under it, that's when we're going to brake. Notice I'm also not braking 100% and I'm waiting until the 50-meter board to turn in. We want to do whatever we can to be as gentle with these cars because as you can see, I let off the brakes a little bit too early and I have to countersteer. Now, countersteering is a really important thing to learn. You're going to have to do that if you want to drive fast, especially in road cars anyways, so even if it looks like a pretty imperfect run, as you can see, we're faster than the last one and this was well within the range of getting a gold. Like in my other guides, we'll go through that one full speed so you can see what it looks like as you're doing it. Like I mentioned before, you want to get yourself aligned with the left side of the track as early on as you can, and I do use the curbing there on the left. I don't go to full brake, I turn in, and even though I lifted off the brakes a little bit too quickly and we had to countersteer, we didn't lose a lot of speed by countersteering. When you're on the edge of losing control, you can generally assume that you're going pretty fast. The next test is a sharper single corner in one of my favorite cars, the S15 Silvia. Even though this car is known for drifting, it's actually a lot more stable under braking and more understeery. The track limits here can also be really tricky, so we're going to go over that. I'm going to show you in detail after we go over the breakdown. First and foremost, we're going to get all the way up on the curb so only our right tires are touching the red and white curbing. Since GT7 has dynamic weather, I would never usually say this, but since this is a static test, there's no changing conditions, you can use the shadow. After you get completely into the sun and before the 100, you want to hit the brakes hard. We're going to get down to third gear, and once again, we're going to use the 50-meter board as a turn-in point. Now, you don't have to worry about the yellow high part of the inside curb here because this is a road car and it can just go straight over without getting too wild. The yellow curb on the outside is the limit, so make sure you don't go 2 tires over that. You can actually put 1 over, as you're going to see. But this one is pretty easy to get well under the gold limit. I'm going to jump out and show you some of the track limits real quick. So as you can see, there are actually a couple more inches of curb that I could have used. And when it comes to the inside curbing, you can see I'm going pretty much straight over it. Once again, we just have to make sure that we're keeping the tires on the red and white curbing. As long as you've got 2 of them on that, you're going to be fine. And again, I had like a foot worth of room. Now that doesn't necessarily mean it would have been faster because you could upset the car even more, but yeah, you can use a lot of that. And finally, I think I was saved by just the front tire touching the yellow curb. I think if 2 tires go over the yellow, then you're going to get a penalty. But since I had 1 tire there with a little bit of a moment, we were fine. The next challenge is a much tighter corner, T1 at Spa. This is a pretty famous corner. It's very famous in sim racing because of how often people crash there, but it can actually be a lot of fun, especially with this car. Fun fact, the very first time I did this, I got a 0.5 and I haven't been able to touch a 0.5 since. So we're not going to try this one again, but here's the breakdown. Looking for the meter boards on the left, when we get fully past the 100 meter board, that is when we're going to brake. You want to turn in right at the 50 meter board. I waited a little bit too long trying to cut the inside and I actually just missed the apex. So if you turn in right at the 50, you'll be fine. We want to turn in, then downshift to first, back up to second for the exit, and be very careful that you continue steering and don't get on the throttle too quickly or too early because you can under or oversteer directly off the track. You can go up on the curbing like usual, but just don't go all the way over it. Patience on the throttle is absolutely the key to getting this one right. As we're watching full speed, I want you to take note of how slowly I turn in. I'm not missing the apex here because I turned in slowly, I'm missing the apex because I turned in too late. You have to turn in slowly and gradually add steering because that's just how trail braking works. Don't try to swing the steering wheel really fast because you're just going to cause understeer. The next test is one of the brand new cars just added with this update, and it's on one of my favorite tracks, Deep Forest. On the first run when I was recording, I actually made a pretty common mistake, but it was just because I ended up braking too late. I didn't deliberately try to take this line. What you're going to see is a late apex. A lot of hairpins require a late apex, but this isn't quite a hairpin. This is a rounded corner. Clearly I went too deep, and you can actually, of course, not go that deep and still hit a late apex like that, but I really kind of V'd up the corner and then shot out, getting a better exit speed than the Ghost, but that diminishes pretty quickly. For a corner like this, you either want to double apex it or really just hug the corner, getting just slightly closer as you apex when you go for the exit, so we're going to break this one down. This is an older car with a lot of power, so you're going to have to brake really early. We're going to look for the 150 meter board, and when we get all the way past that, that's when we're going to hit the brakes. It's unfortunately hard to see, but we're going to wait till we get to the 50 meter board to start turning in. Keep your eye on my brake input to notice that I'm really gradually letting off the brake pressure, taking my time to trail brake in. It's still a fairly late apex, but you'll notice that I'm staying on the curb for a while, staying on that clipping point for quite some time. Adding more steering as I'm coming off the brakes, I'm going to get on the throttle gently and I'm going to make sure that I shift up to third gear before. Anytime we can eliminate a shift, we're going to find a lot of speed, especially with a car that has a slower transmission like this. If we've got enough power, then we don't have to really worry about winding out second gear coming out of that. It's just going to waste time trying to shift. There is more time to be found here, but the margins are still pretty tight, so let's look at it full speed. So like I said, we're looking for the 150 meter board and we're going to brake when we get all the way past it. Be very patient, turn in at the 50 meter board, linger on the curb until you're absolutely certain that you can get on the throttle and exit. And of course, we're in third gear. Like I said, it's going to waste time trying to shift between second and third, so just exit in third. The car has more than enough power. License test B8 is at a very famous set of corners on the very famous Suzuka. These corners are known as Degner 1 and 2, the Degners. As soon as you've got control of the car, align yourself to the left and start looking for the meter boards for your brake marker. Notice that I'm not going to brake at 100%. We're going to look for the digital flag marker before the 50 meter board, and we're just going to brake enough to shift weight forward, but not too much, and bleed off a little bit of speed, really focusing on just making it so we've got enough weight to control the front tires. We want to really glide over this first curb and get back on the throttle really soon. I didn't get on the throttle early enough, and I slowed down too much, which is actually what caused me to lose control of the car temporarily right there. It's okay if you brake a little bit in the grass. We want to hit this apex really early and then get on the throttle as soon as we possibly can in third gear. Like always, going up under the curb is totally fine, and this extra bit of pavement under the bridge helps us make sure we don't lose a lot of speed in the grass. As we watch it in full speed, you should be able to see that I transferred too much weight forward and slowed down too much, and that's what caused us to oversteer on entry. Since the car doesn't have a lot of power, we can get back on the throttle pretty heavily to fix that little moment. And of course, we then have to decelerate immediately so we can hit this apex and get back on that throttle. And again, make sure you're in third gear coming out of that corner. The penultimate test of the Masters B license is another fun rear-wheel drive road car at Road Atlanta. The hardest part about this test is actually braking into the first corner. For the longest time when I was trying to learn this track, I just used spots on the ground, which is almost never a good idea because you definitely can't see them when you're racing people. So if we look here in the shadows though, there's a very difficult to see 300-foot board there underneath the tree. It's a lot easier to spot when you know to look for it. Keep your eye on the Michelin sign ahead and the white lines on the ground because that is our turn-in point. We want to really quickly get off the brakes. Of course, we're still trail braking in, but get off the brakes as soon as you can to free up the front tires, back on the throttle in third gear, and track yourself out all the way to the left side of the track. The next braking zone is actually just as tough, but this yellow line kinks inward, and so right about there is when you want to brake, of course with your left tires all the way up on the curb. The tire marks on the ground are really helpful. You want to turn in and be on the inside of those, going completely over this curb here. Get in third gear and get fully on the throttle as soon as you can, tracking out all the way onto the outside curbing here as well. This car, like I said, is rear-wheel drive, and it is a road car. It's an old one too, so it's really important to get off the brakes as soon as you can, but that doesn't mean just fully lifting off without trail braking. Unlike with the deep forest test, I'm not going to be on the brakes lingering for a very long time. You'll see that I'm pretty quickly getting off, but I am still trail braking for both of the braking zones. You want to use as much of that curb as you can, both on the entry and the exit, because the car again has soft suspension, and you don't have to worry about it getting too skittish when you go over the curbs. The next test is the final test of the Masters B license, and if you finish this one, you actually get the car that you use in the final test. This is an extremely old car, so you can assume it's not going to handle very well, and just one look at it, you can tell that it barely has anything for front tires, so be very careful with your steering. This blind crest can make it really tricky if you're not used to the track, but just try to set up on the outside and look for the markers here on the right. The end of the red and white curbing on the right is our braking point. You want to brake in a straight line, and that runoff on the outside is really helpful for that. As I'm trail braking, I want you to notice my steering. I'm really trying to find the grip because there is very little grip in the front tires, so you've got to be very careful and very patient as you're trail braking off. You want to hit both apexes on this corner. It's not worth it to go deep and then hit just the second apex because you'll just waste a lot of time there. If you blip the throttle, you can get it to rotate. If you're not really used to that, it's better just to be very patient as you get on throttle, but definitely exit in second gear. Aim for the 3 marker and gently curve the car in towards the outside line. You don't have to be perfectly parallel with the outside of the track. At the 2 marker in the distance is when we're going to brake, and since we're still turning, we're just going to use the brake to slow ourselves down, scrubbing off speed rather than going full brake and then turning in. We're really just decelerating through the curve that already exists from the last exit. Be as patient as you can getting next to that sausage, staying in 3rd gear, and when you know you've got it, get fully on the throttle and ride the outside curving all the way to the finish. Alright, let's go over it in full speed. Like I was saying before, it can be difficult to get your bearings if you're not really familiar with Laguna Seca. Just stick to the inside until you can see the markers on the outside and then find yourself over there. Brake at the end of the colored curbing, turn in before the final line, and make sure you hit both of these apexes. You'll hit your lowest speed right in the middle of them. Stay in 2nd gear to exit this corner so you don't understeer off the track, and this is one big curve rather than braking in a straight line and then turning. You don't want to go full brake because you're really just decelerating and tightening up the curve that already exists. There you go. I hope you're able to get gold in all of them. I do plan on making a guide for the rest of these, so what do you guys think? Are they necessary? These tests were pretty simple, except for maybe the rainy ones, but they do ramp up in difficulty. I've made it through about 30 of them so far, I think. So I do plan on making it, especially if you guys tell me you want them. Let me know. Please don't forget to like and subscribe if you liked what you saw here. I make guides for daily races as well using an anti-meta car, and like I said, I do plan on making guides for the rest of these. Just let me know if you think it's worth it.